guys. Hi. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and take over the screen. And we'll go ahead and kick off our conference today. Thank you so much for being with us. I think probably some folks are still logging in, but this is the ProLink Technology Live 2022 conference. This serves as our user group conference. We have quite a group of nearly 200 registered for this event of both clients and non-clients and partners that we work with to provide the software and services that we do for our clients. So it's definitely a mix of folks. At the end of the day, I think we're all interested in improving the way that we do things and advancing our work and bringing ourselves to the next level. So I appreciate you for taking the time to join us today to talk about some of those business cases and how ProLink can help serve you in your efforts to improve your business process. And we have a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of run through some housekeeping. And you can obviously, Jennifer Schwartz is on the line with me. She's on video with me, and she's going to be our keynote. I'll introduce her in just a minute. So we have two tracks that we're offering with this conference. We have a single family, multifamily track for ProLink HFA, and then we also have our half track for ProLink Plus. So there's two going on. There'll be simultaneous sessions there to promote as much participation simultaneously as possible. We have polls that we've developed that will be built in throughout the presentation that we'll be sharing. And then we have something called Coffee and Bagel, which is that video that you just watched. Coffee and Bagel is for break sessions between our longer training sessions. We have a few breaks built in to just gather and kind of have some casual interactions with each other. So we do have some gift cards and prizes available that we want to send out the door for participation in those coffee and bagel sessions. So I encourage you to do that. And then we do have a tag for this conference, a hashtag that we're using for social media. It's ProLink Tech Live 22, and we'll be posting each day about the conference. So thank you for attending, and please participate with us. And we look forward to the next couple of days with you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jennifer. I'm not going to give her the screen yet to start her presentation, but to introduce her, she is the Director of Tax Credit and Housing Advocacy at NCSHA. She leads the legislative and advocacy activities related to housing tax programs, including low-income housing tax credit and tax-exempt housing bonds, and oversees other NCSHA housing policy priorities related to HUD programs and fair housing. Today, she's going to provide us insights on what's happening in Washington, particularly focused on the lame duck session, average income test, and housing credit deadline relief. So those are big topics, obviously, and high stakes for the affordable housing industry. And then she'll be providing an update on the fiscal year 2023 appropriations and ongoing housing credit regulatory issues. So lots to cover in the next 45 minutes or so with her. Thank you, Jennifer, for being with us again. And she was our keynote last year as well. So we really do appreciate NCSHA's participation and support of this conference and of our group of agencies who are participating today. So before handing that off, let me just cover a couple housekeeping items. The first one is just familiarizing yourselves with the Cvent platform, which is the platform you've logged into to join our conference. You've made it to this session, so great job, everybody. You should see on the right-hand side, there's a few options you have, the chat feature being the first one. We definitely encourage you to use that, and you can comment and ask questions throughout all the presentations, including this one. If we have time towards the end, we will definitely address questions with Jennifer. But those chats they're visible to everybody, so make sure you're aware of that. You'll be sending out those messages, and everybody in the conference can see those responses back and forth, which is great for collaboration. And say hi to everybody, say hi to each other. We have polls next. So that is to, we're going to be issuing questions. We'll have a practice run in just a minute, and you can immediately respond to those through the app, through that polls. You have to click on that polls screen to be able to respond as I release these questions, and then you'll be able to see the real-time results when we close the poll. And then, of course, you saw that last one. I didn't cover it, but there is a survey link as well on the right-hand panel. So feel free to leave surveys throughout the conference. We do have, when you click into any session offered on Cvent, you have the overview of the session, and then you have any links to documents or attachments or presentation materials that we're offering. They're located at the bottom under that session content area. So you can see with Jennifer's presentation, which is about to start, you can download that at any point before, after, during the presentation. So that's available to you as well. And going into our first poll. So this is, we're going to do a little poll before we start her session as well. And so this is the first question, which will get you familiar with using that polls link on the right-hand menu. The first one we want to ask is, we're wondering the most important thing Congress could do to increase affordable housing production in my state would be, and you have some options listed there. So go ahead and answer that poll. And we'll close it in I'm going to count down for Ryan, and then he's going to quickly post the results for us on my next slide so that I can present them. You'll see them immediately once we close the poll, but I'm going to give you about 15 more seconds to answer that one. So please do so, and I'll close it in just a few more seconds. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll close it. And then I'll give Ryan about 5 seconds to get that screenshot onto my slide deck. Okay, and there we go. So it looks like 100% of the people who responded said all of the above, which just went away, but I did see that. Let's see, maybe we got some additional responses that came in. Oh, no, there we go. Okay, so it says reinstate the 12.5% cap increase in the Housing Credit Authority for 4% said that one. Lower the bond financing threshold from 50% to 25%. 25% said that would be best. Robustly fund HUD programs, 4%. All the above, 64%, and something else, 3%. Okay. So going into our next one. So in early October, IRS they extended the placed in service deadline for developments allocated credits in 2021 from December 31st, 2023 to the December 31st, 2024. Are there developments in the pipeline in your state that needed this extension? So you'll have about 30 seconds or so to answer this one. Okay, I'm going to start counting down. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we'll close the poll. You should see the results on your screen. It just takes a minute. We're kind of blind on the presenter side, so it takes a minute for us to see the same results. I'll give Ryan just a second to get him over to me. Okay, so it looks like option B was most popular. Yes, some of the developments allocated credits in 2021 in my state needed this extension, and then 46% said they did not know or not applicable. Oh, it looks like some updates. So it must be some results coming in. So a couple others on the yes, most if not all of the developments allocated credits in 2021 in my state needed the extension, and then looks like at least one person responded to C as well. They did not need this extension. Okay, and then the last one, how would you describe the level of policies and procedures in place to handle average income deals in your state? So this is obviously a big topic, so I'll give you 30 seconds or so to respond to this. We'll have plenty to talk about here with Jennifer as well. Okay, and I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll close that poll. And give Ryan just a second. I'm going to wait just a second. I don't trust it when it's everybody on one answer now. I think we maybe have some updates. There we go. Okay, so for this one, existing published policies are in line with the average income test final rule and do not require updating. So 13% said that one. 25% said existing published policies may need to be adjusted. 37%, we do not have existing published policies on AIT implementation. But now that the final rule is out, we intend to develop policies. 0% said they don't have existing and they don't intend to develop any. And then I don't know or not applicable was 25%. Okay. Okay, so I think that covers what I wanted to cover. Thank you guys for going through that exercise for me and testing out our poll. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer and she'll begin her keynote topics for us. We appreciate it, Jennifer. Thank you again for being with us. And please do use that chat. We're going to be managing the chat feature in Cvent, and I'll be able to bring those questions up towards the end of Jennifer's session if any arise. So thank you again. We look forward to a great conference.
And Brianna, I'm going to share my screen now, okay?
Great.
All right. Hopefully everybody can see this. So first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to ProLink for inviting me here today to speak to this conference. It's exciting. It's kind of a crazy day to be having this conversation. And I know that we need to talk about average income test and deadlines and everything that's going on the, in practice and what you're all dealing with on the ground. But I do want to take some time to talk a little bit about the election yesterday and where things stand, because obviously that is high on my list of the things that I work on. And I had talked to Ryan in advance of the session to say that, I wanted to do a little bit of a lay of the land, where things stand in the lame duck session, which is the remainder of this calendar year, and what we might expect from the 118th Congress starting next year. So before I do that, I think most of you probably know me. As Brianna introduced me, I'm Jennifer Schwartz with the National Council of State Housing Agencies, and I lead a lot of our legislative work, especially when it comes to tax programs, and then I also oversee the appropriations side of our shop as well. So just to get us started, I do want to start with what's going on in Congress today. And as those of you who've turned on the television or picked up a newspaper so far know, as of this morning, we do not know which committee, which party is going to control either of the chambers of Congress. So there is a lot that is still undecided. Last that I checked before coming on to this call into this session, Democrats will be holding at least 48 seats in the Senate. Republicans were holding at least 47 seats in the Senate, and the states of Georgia, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, and Alaska were still counting votes. So we don't know which party is going to have control in the Senate. Our current Senate is a 50-50 split, with the vice president giving control to the Democrats. So we'll see what happens as the day moves on, and possibly we won't even know what the outcome could be until December 6th. And that's because if if we end up with both sides, the Democrats get at 49 seats and the Republicans at 50, and the Georgia seat is neither candidate gets to 50% of the total votes, there would be a runoff election there that would happen on December 6th. So there's, we may know the outcome very soon, but we might have to wait for a little bit before we know it all. So far on the Senate side, the Democrats have flipped one seat. That's Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Everything else has remained the same thus far. And then over on the House side, different media sources have different numbers up as far as how many seats have been called. I looked quickly at the New York Times right before getting on this into this session. And at that point, they had Republicans holding 197 seats, Democrats holding 174. There were 65 seats hanging in the balance. The Washington Post had this slightly differently, fewer seats called. Republicans need to gain 5 seats from where they are in the 117th Congress to take over the House. That has been widely expected that they would, but it definitely seems that the red wave that some pundits had been projecting has not happened. So what we don't know is whether or not the Republicans are going to get a small majority, or if Democrats are going to, somehow hold out and keep the House. So there's a lot that's still unknown right now over on the House side. According to the Cook Political Report, there were 45 seats that were held by Democrats and 19 held by Republicans in the current Congress that they consider to be competitive. Republicans have thus far claimed 3 of the 45 competitive Democratic seats, and Democrats have so far claimed 13 of those. The rest of them are not final yet. And then of the 19 seats that were Republican seats currently and were competitive, Democrats have taken 5 of those and Republicans have maintained 3. So lots going on right now. We're going to be watching this very, very closely. NCSHA will be, for those of you who are NCSHA members, which I think is most of the audience, we'll be sending out an election memo report later on today, but we still are probably not going to know some of the answers to the big questions. But of course, we're here to talk about affordable housing. So the next obvious question is, how do these results impact our affordable housing priorities in the last few weeks of the 117th Congress and next year in the 118th Congress? So I want to start by talking about what to expect over the next few weeks. And so that time period after Congress returns, after a general election and before the next Congress takes office, is called the lame duck session. And usually this is a very busy time in Congress where there's a lot of cleanup work that Congress is trying to do before the next Congress takes office. So there's a lot that's at stake here. First of all, FY 2023 appropriations. We do not have final appropriations numbers for HUD programs or for anything in the federal budget right now. So currently there is a continuing resolution, which is how we're funding the government at the moment. So programs are being funded at their FY 2022 levels, even though we are in and have been in FY 2023 since October 1st. And that continuing resolution goes through December 16th. So by December 16th, we're going to see, one of several options happen. Either Congress is going to pass appropriations bills for FY 2023, excuse me, and that'll be done. Or Congress might pass another continuing resolution, which probably would just give them a few more days to continue their negotiations with the expectation that they would finish that before the end of the year. I think it is certainly possible, but unlikely that they would pass a continuing resolution that would move into the next Congress. They have done that in the past, but I don't see that happening this year for a few different reasons. Or of course, the worst outcome would be having the government shut down if Congress is not able to pass the bills or a continuing resolution before the current continuing resolution expires. So that's going on right now. One of the main reasons why I expect Congress is going to be able to deal with appropriations is that two of the key appropriators, the chairman and the ranking member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, both retire at the end of this year, and they are not going to want to leave their job undone and go home. So I think that there is going to be a lot of impetus for Congress to move on those spending bills before the end of the year. The next big question is tax. And we have seen many times what we would call a tax title, so a section of a bill that deals with tax being tagged on to an appropriations bill at the end of the year. We saw that 2 years ago in the lame duck session, and that was when we got the 4% minimum rate passed and disaster credits for a number of states. Those moved together with the appropriations bill that year. That could happen again. There are a number of expiring tax provisions that many in Congress would like to extend. And of course, one of those provisions is the increase in housing credit allocation that we had from 2018 through 2021 that obviously already expired at the end of 2021. But the question is Congress going to pass a tax bill that would likely hitch a ride with appropriations that would include those tax extenders, and if so, would it include the 12.5%? And then there's the question of, well, for how many years is that retroactive to give you back some credits in 2022? Would it start in 2023? These are the things that we're talking to Congress about now. Should there be a tax vehicle that moves? And then if there is a tax vehicle that moves, we think extenders are the first thing that would be in that, but then there is a question about whether or not that would be a broader tax bill that could include other priorities. And if there is any chance of that at all, we are pushing as hard as we possibly can for, first of all, further increases to the 9% program beyond the 12.5%, but also for lowering the 50% test. So that's the bond financing threshold for 4% credit deals. These are absolutely top priorities for NCSHA in this lame duck session. We're also talking to folks about some of our other priorities, things like qualified contracts and right of first refusal fixes. Other priorities from AHCIA, that's the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. I should not jump into acronyms so easily. But there's a lot that's at stake. However, I think most likely this is going to be, if we have a tax bill at all, it's going to be small. And how small? Definitely a question. Is it just extenders or is it anything broader? But I think even if it's broader, chances are we're not going to get a lot of bites at this apple. And so we really are prioritizing those production provisions, things that really would increase supply as our topmost priorities there. Another thing that's being talked about a lot is the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. That's something that is also a priority for NCSHA, and we know that there are a number of members of the Finance Committee and the Ways and Means Committee who would like to see that enacted in a lame duck session. Again, we'll see. And then there's also the question of whether or not Congress might consider disaster relief. And if so, is there any chance of disaster housing credit authority again this year, like we got 2 years ago? So lots of things that are up and at stake for us as a community in this lame duck session. And again, this is all going to depend on the negotiations. And what I've heard from our friends on the Hill is that they wanted to see what happened with the election. I don't know if they're going to have any more answers for us today, since we don't really know what the outcome of the election is. And I think there's going to still be some time of taking everyone's temperature and finding out what the appetite is in Congress for addressing these provisions this year. But lots to come. So please stay tuned. Oops. And again, I think just on the election outcome, just a couple of things to note. I think that if the Republicans, one of the things that had been a question was whether or not, if Republicans had a huge victory yesterday, would that mean that they would push more into the next Congress and not want to deal and negotiate during the lame duck because they'd feel that they had more leverage when they would come back in January with more members. That was one of the questions. I think that given the fact that it looks like if Republicans take both or either chamber, it's going to be a small majority. I think there still might be a lot of impetus to negotiate this year rather than pushing it into next year. All right. So I just want to talk a little bit about the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which many of you are familiar with. This is the big comprehensive housing credit legislation that we've been working on for a number of years now, a number of Congresses. We've had numerous places where we've had successes coming out of this bill. So average income test, the minimum 4% rate were both huge successes that came from this legislation. But again, as I was mentioning before, we are still pushing components of this as we move forward into the lame duck, and we will be next year. So this is where we stand here on co-sponsors. As you can see, we do try in everything that we do always have bipartisan support. Obviously, when you look at these numbers, you can see that we are more heavily weighted with Democrats than we are with Republicans. We are constantly trying to increase our Republican support of this legislation. I think the good news is that we've got a really strong group of Republicans that are already on this bill. And given the polarization in Congress, this is probably one of the most bipartisan bills out there. So that's really good news for us. And it's because the housing credit is something that both sides can really support. I think both sides understand that we have a housing crisis and that the housing credit is a really important tool for dealing with that housing crisis. So we've been very fortunate in that respect. And I say fortunate, but it's also because of a lot of work that's been done by all of you out in the States as you're talking to your members of Congress, by those of us that are here inside the Beltway working this issue. We've spent a lot of time educating members about the housing credit, advocating for it, and it shows. So just, if any of you are making calls to your members, and I hope you all are, this is what I would say for the existing co-sponsors, and you can go to NCSHA's website, and there is a Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act co-sponsorship list there. If they are on one of the tax committees, so that's the Ways and Means Committee in the House and the Finance Committee in the Senate, we're encouraging you to talk to your members on those committees and encourage them to talk to their full chair leadership in whichever chamber they're in, but also to leadership on the Ways and Means and Finance Committee, so the chairs and ranking members of those committees, to ask them to include housing credit provisions, specifically those production provisions, in an end-of-year package. If you have off-committee members who are co-sponsors of the legislation, please encourage them to talk directly to their leadership in their chamber about this. And then even for members who are not yet co-sponsors, this is really important. Continuing, first of all, to urge them to get on the bill. We'd love to be able to increase our co-sponsorship numbers, but make sure that they at least understand the importance of this in moving forward this year. Oops, I'm so sorry. I accidentally clicked. And the importance of this bill to their district. And even if they haven't officially co-sponsored, some members don't want to put their name on something, but they will talk to their leadership behind the scenes and say, hey, I'd like to see this happen. And so that would be really, really helpful. Some of the salient talking points, I think really inflation is something that is really resonating with members of Congress. And housing costs are, shelter is about 1/3 of the CPI, which is what's used to measure inflation. We're seeing really high increases in shelter, especially over on the rental side. And that's because of this imbalance between supply and demand. And so reminding members of Congress that we cannot combat inflation unless we deal with affordable housing, I think is a really important message, making sure Democrats really understand that the end beneficiary of this program are the low-income families that are being served by it, and underscoring with Republicans that the low-income housing credit is a public-private partnership model that brings private sector due diligence. The private sector is taking on the risk, and that it is administered at the state level are all arguments that I find to be really important when talking to Republicans, and something they're very responsive to. Just talking a little bit about appropriations. I'm not going to go over all of the numbers that are in this chart, but something to know, we've got a number of columns here. The FY 2022 enacted, that's what we're currently under this continuing resolution. The president's budget request, that's what the president said he would like to see in FY 2023 appropriations. And then the House has passed its appropriations bills. The Senate has not passed its appropriations bills, but the committee had released appropriations bills. And so you can see the different tallies, different numbers that all of those different stakeholders put in for HUD programs. However, the House passed bill and the Senate bills that have been released were completely written by Democrats. And this end of the year bill will have to be a bipartisan bill. So these are high watermarks for funding, and we'll see what happens. We, of course, always are watching funding for home and advocating for funding for home very, very closely, also for rental assistance. Lots going on the PPCA front. I'm not going to get into all of that, but there's a lot at stake in the appropriations, not just the bill, not just the funding amounts, but also the bill language. So what about next year? There's a lot of what ifs in this. So if Republicans take the House and the Senate, our housing priorities could still be in good shape. As I mentioned before, we really do have very strong bipartisan support on our tax bills. So I'm not necessarily concerned that that is going to mean that we won't see action on affordable housing. A couple things to note: we are going to see change in the leadership of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee in the House that deals with taxes. And that is because Representative Brady, who is currently the ranking member, so Republican lead of the Ways and Means Committee, retires at the end of this year. There are 3 different committee members on the Republican side that are vying for the head position. Whether or not that's chairman or ranking member is still unknown, although I think most people think that the House is going to go Republican. So, 2 of the 3, Vern Buchanan and Jason Smith, Buchanan from Florida and Smith from Missouri, are co-sponsors of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. Representative Brady, who's retiring, is not, and he has never been a big supporter of the housing credit program, and even more so of the bond program. He's had some doubts about that. So I think that, if either Representative Buchanan or Representative Smith were to become Ways and Means Chairman, that could be very good for us as well. Certainly, if the Democrats keep the Senate, then the House, Representative Neal, who is the current chairman and a huge supporter of the housing credit, would remain chairman of that committee. Over on the Senate side, both Senator Wyden, who chairs the Finance Committee right now, the Tax Writing Committee in the Senate, and Senator Crapo, who is currently the ranking member, they both were up for a reelection. They both won their reelection handily. And Senator, if the Republicans were to take the Senate, Senator Crapo would become chairman. While he is not a co-sponsor of our housing bill, he is a, generally very supportive of the housing credit. So again, I think, while Senator Wyden certainly has been a huge champion for us, I think we would be in good hands regardless there. There are also a lot of provisions, a lot of things that we'd like to get done that are good governance and low or no cost. So we'll see what we might be able to accomplish next year. Obviously, the provisions that increase production have cost, but I think that, we will continue to make the argument that it is a great bang for your buck that you get with those. And of course, Senator Young, who is the lead Republican on the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, is an amazing supporter of our programs and affordable housing generally, and a real advocate for that. And if Republicans were to take control of the Senate, he would continue to, I think, raise that flag and be a great leader there. Obviously, Senator Cantwell, who is our Democratic lead, is as well. They are a fantastic team. If Democrats were to keep control of both chambers of Congress, I think they would likely be emboldened to take on an aggressive agenda next year. However, that might be tempered some because of fears of inflation. So we'll see what happens there. But I think that as always, we've got really strong Democratic support for the things that we're working for. And then, of course, if there's a split Congress, say the Democrats keep control of the Senate, but the House goes Republican, there's going to be a fair amount of gridlock, as there always is in those situations. However, there are going to be certain things that they will have to deal with, always appropriations. And then the sleeper thing that is really going to be a big issue next year is the debt ceiling. We're going to hit that debt ceiling again at some point next year, and that could be a nasty fight. So we'll see what happens, but they're going to have to deal with that in one shape or form. So I'm going to move on to the regulatory side. That was kind of my update generally on the legislative side. I'm sure that things have changed since I got into this meeting with you. So I'm looking forward to getting back and digging back in when we're done. But starting with regulations, I wanted to focus on the two big things that happened recently. So average income test regs and the deadline relief. And NCSHA was very involved on both accounts. I think, as everybody knows, when the average income test proposed rule came out in October of 2020, there were a lot of concerns about that. It was not a workable rule in practice. And, NCSHA brought together a coalition at the time to work together on what our comments were going to be. We provided IRS very, very detailed comments, as did many other organizations. Everybody strongly disagreed with the proposed rule. And then, many of our organizations testified to the IRS. And then the following year in 2021, we organized a letter that basically brought together all of the stakeholders on average income tests, or all of the major stakeholders, to say, okay, we've told you what we think is wrong. We've had a couple of different things that we think you could do to fix this. And this is where we have consensus. You can do it this way, or you could do it that way. Either of these would work. Here's, what we need you to do. And the good news is that IRS heard us. So let's talk a little bit about the final rule of the average income test. And I know that you guys will be delving much more deeply into this, but we were really excited. So a few of the big changes from the proposed rule. One, how do you meet the minimum set aside? What is the effect of unit noncompliance on the applicable fraction? The ability to modify unit designations, and these new reporting requirements. So these are all new things that we need to be aware of. So starting out with meeting the average income test minimum set aside, and I know this is going to be reviewed for many of you because you've been poring over these rules, probably this rule since it came out. But the first thing that we need to do is that the project needs to contain, and the taxpayer needs to designate a qualified group of units that would be at least 40% of the units in the project. The original proposed rule said all of the units in the project need to average 60% in order to meet the minimum set aside. This was a huge step forward to convince the IRS that no, that is not what the statute requires. Instead, it is that 40% of the units need to be this qualified group and have an average of 60% of area median income. Within those that qualified group, all of those units need to be low income units, and the AIT has to be met every single year. It is not a one and done when you first put a property in service. So the next question then, of course, is what is a low income unit? That unit needs to be rent restricted. The occupant needs to satisfy the imputed income limitation of the unit. And the income designation needs to be somewhere between 20 and 80 on the 10. So 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80% of area median income. You cannot do a unit that is a 35% unit. It has to be a division of 10. So in addition to this 40% of units that has to be qualified group that you need for your minimum set aside, you also need to have a qualified group of units for the whole project. So all of the units that are low income units in the project. So if this is 100% low income unit, 100% of low income project, 100% of those units also need to average to 60%. The important thing is that if one of those units goes out of compliance, so long as you still have 40% of units that average to 60, you're not going to blow your minimum set aside. That is just a non-compliance issue with that unit that has gone out of compliance. So that was a huge win to get from the IRS in this rule. The units, of course, all need to be, as before, rent restricted and occupied by households that have incomes that are consistent with their unit designation. One of the things that I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of is that the applicable fraction of the building doesn't need to be a qualified group. So you might have, if you've got a multi-building project, you could have, the units in one building having an average that's higher than 60, but that's okay as long as all of the units that are low income units in the full project average 60% or less of area median income. And then, of course, this leads to the next line of thought, which is how does an owner identify the units in this qualified group? So for new units, the taxpayer needs to designate the imputed income limitation before the unit is first occupied. For occupied existing units, the taxpayer needs to designate the unit, the imputed income limitation no later than the end of the taxable year in which the income designation change occurs. And for the taxpayer would need to record all of this in their books and records and communicate it annually with the State Housing Credit Agency. And that is one of the things that the Housing Credit Agency is going to need to consider in its policies is how do you want to get that information? What's the timing on that? So there are a number of things that HFAs and other housing credit allocating agencies are going to need to think about in implementation of the average income test. So why might an owner change a unit's designation? In the proposed rule, an owner had to designate a unit, and that designation stuck forever for the life of the project, for the affordability period anyway. That unit was, if it was a 50% unit, it remained a 50% unit. This was one of the things that we thought was absolutely not workable with the proposed rule, and we were thrilled that the IRS allowed for owners to change unit designations. And it seems that they were very, very generous in the reasons why an owner can change a unit designation. So if for some reason IRS puts out any kind of instructions or guidance saying, here's a new reason why you can change a unit's income designation, that would be one, okay, yes, you can change it for those reasons. Whatever the Housing Credit Agency permits in its public written guidance for reasons why a unit's income designation can change, that's also acceptable. And that means that state housing finance agencies are going to need to be looking at what their written guidance is and ensuring that all of the reasons why they think that an owner might want to change unit designation, and that would be acceptable to the agency, are included there. We want to be as broad as we can be. I think nobody wants to prevent a property from, or have non-compliance for some reason due to this. One of the things that I have heard from industry folks so far is that they want housing finance agencies to include in their policies an allowance for owners to change the income designation if there is a change in the market that requires that makes the owner want to be able to do that. So I think that that's one of the things that states should be thinking about is market changes and how that might impact an average income test deal, because the market changes is not one of the things that the IRS listed in these bullets. They can also change a unit's income designation if they need to do so in compliance with other programs or laws, including fair housing laws, VAWA, ADA, all of those things. So that's really important. And then lastly, and I know this is something that the industry is also very excited about, to restore compliance, an owner can change an income designation. So that's going to be, I think, critical as we move forward. So again, housing finance agencies, and this is something that NCSHA is going to be working on and bringing, providing a forum for agencies to come and talk about this is, what do we have to do with existing policies? So first of all, I would say, if you have AIT policies that work, that does not mean that you need to halt everything so you can review your policies. If you think that they're working now, you can keep going. You can make changes at some point later. You don't need to stop. If you have existing AIT policies that you want to change for some reason, I think that it makes sense to change them. You're going to be thinking about unit redesignation. How do you want to, require, what are you going to want to allow in your state? How do you want to make this as workable as possible? And of course, for those of you who don't have guidance, I'm sure you're going to be looking to your peers in other states to see what's been working in their states. You are also going to need to establish a time and manner in which the unit designation information is provided to your state annually. So that's another thing that I think states need to think about in regards to the reporting requirements that they're going to have for owners. And again, I think this comes as no surprise. The industry would like as much consistency as possible across states, which I think is where we come in. I mean, NCSHA certainly does not mandate anything of our members, but we do want to provide a forum so that what works can be duplicated across states. Lastly, I would say that IRS also gives states some discretion here to provide waivers on a case-by-case basis if there is a failure to comply with the reporting requirements. You would have the owner would have 180 days. You could waive those reporting requirements after the discovery of the failure so that they could get that fixed. And so some of the things that I'm thinking about here is, what if the owner says, okay, here's my qualified group of units that meets the applicable fraction and that meets the minimum set aside. And gosh, one of those units, it was a student, and I've already said, here's my qualified group of units. We do not want the owner to miss its minimum set aside because of that. If there's another unit, they could swap in and maintain that 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 average for those 40% of units. So these are some of the things that we're going to need to think about and be very, very clear in written policies, because we want investors to feel comfortable with this. Just quickly, the next available unit rule is a little bit complex. I know many of you are thinking about, well, what are you going to do if you've got projects that are that have some market rate units that are not low income units in the property? There is, I think, good, the IRS came out well on how to deal with the next available unit rule, but I'm not going to go into all of those details. Just turning very briefly to the deadline relief. This is just a little chart of what we were able to get on deadline relief. We were very, very pleased, not only with what IRS provided, but also the speed at which they provided this relief. The notice that came out in October was not that long after the previous notice, which came out in January. And we came to IRS in July and said, hey, the notice that you put out in January was great, but there are a number of projects that are going to need even longer. And those deals that got credits in 2021, they're going to need some additional time to place in service. And IRS worked very, very quickly on this. As you saw with average income tests, sometimes things take years. This one took months, and we were able to get it out they were able to get it out in just a couple of months. So I was very pleased to see those extensions, and especially relief for the 2021 credit allocations. A couple of other deadline changes that came out in the October deadline rule. One was more time for projects that are suffering a casualty loss, and more time for the extending the non-compliance corrective action period extension to some new properties that might need it. And also, if there were to be outbreaks in areas where state HFAs felt that they should not be doing in-person physical inspections, that they could continue to waive those until the end of 2023. So all of these, I think, were really great steps by the IRS. I will say that IRS has had the ability to extend things like the placed in service deadline, because we are currently in a major disaster with COVID that has been declared a presidentially declared disaster. Once that it has an end date to it, IRS will not have the ability to extend the placed in service date. They do have more flexibility. They could do what they wanted to on casualty loss, for example, but placed in service is a statutory deadline otherwise. So, we're glad that we were able to get them to act now with that. And I know that I'm getting close to my time, so I'm going to finish up then and see if there are questions. And I don't know, Brianna, if you want to come back on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. Last I checked, we did not have questions. I hear an echo. Let me just make sure on the chat. Does not look like we have any. So apparently you answered everybody's questions throughout your talk. And I know for the NCSHA Institute coming up in January, average income test is going to be quite the topic throughout that conference.
Absolutely.
Well. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
we'll be doing a lot on average income test. There's that conference, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to plug that. We do our big HFA Institute in January, which is actually 4 different modules, the housing credit being one of those modules. Average income test will be a big part of that. But we're also going to be doing some work in between now and then. You all have not received this from me yet, but we're going to try and set up a Zoom call for state HFAs to talk about average income test policies, probably at the end of November. So watch for that. That'll probably come out in our HFA, our housing credit community group later on today. And yeah, there's just a lot going on.
Awesome. Well, make sure everybody, when you go to that November session, that you come back and tell your partners about what's discussed there, so that we can be prepared in addressing everything that we need to from a technology perspective. So we look forward to really honing in and understanding more about average income test as we move along. I just have a couple of additional items to close us out. So let me just pull up my notes here and make sure that I lead everybody in the right direction. So first of all, you guys know where that link is within this session to grab Jennifer's presentation. So that's available to you, and make sure that you keep note of that throughout the rest of the sessions that we hold, because we will have materials there for you. There is that survey link. Again, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to understand more about what you're looking for in this conference throughout today and tomorrow. So please provide surveys and feedback if you have anything that you think we should know or you'd like to see more of in the future, or things that you like and find really informative and beneficial. We want to hear and make sure that we're meeting those needs and desires of our audience. So those are two things. And then we have now, for the next 15 minutes, starting at 10 a.m., so just about the time I end here, we're going to host our first coffee and bagel session. So this, again, is something we're trying to highlight amongst our attendees to encourage just the chance to connect. And it is fun. So if you go under that, this is actually under the community menu at the very top right-hand side of Cvent, you'll see a discussions option. So click discussions and it'll take you into, you'll see a coffee and bagel session with the time slot, and you can join in. There's I think it limits it to 6 people to join each room. So it'll be kind of a little bit smaller, intimate group where we can just freely talk. And then again, we do have gift cards that we will be issuing to, I think it's a random selection for winners, just for your participation over the next couple of days in those breakout sessions. And with that, this is the end of our first session. So we have, I think you can go ahead and head straight to Coffee and Bagel and join that. Our next topic is going to start, it looks like at 12:15 Eastern time, and it is the update on 8823 and the average income test. So great topic to just slide right into after Jennifer. And thank you again so much for being here with us and providing our entry into the conference this year. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. All right,
Have a
everybody.
wonderful rest of your conference.
Yeah, thank you. And we will see you in January. ProLink will be at the Institute as well. So I will see you guys in Coffee and Bagel in just a minute, and enjoy the rest of the conference.